A commercial jet doesn't shake like this, it screams. The cabin lights flicker like they're about to give up, overhead bins rattle like loose teeth, and somewhere outside the right window, passengers start spotting the thing you never want to see at 30,000 feet, smoke. Not the faint mist of a cloudy day, but a dark ribbon pouring straight out of the wing like the plane is bleeding. The captain's voice comes on, calm in that practiced way that usually works. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a minor technical issue. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. But the floor is vibrating under your shoes, hard enough that phones slide off trays and people's hands clamp down on armrests without realizing it. You can feel the fear travel row to row like electricity, because everyone knows minor doesn't come with violent shuddering and a burning smell creeping through the vents. At the front, the senior crew member is already moving fast, eyes wide, trying to keep the cabin from turning into a riot, and the other attendants look like they're waiting for the next instruction that might save them from making the wrong move. And then there's the new girl. Not the confident veteran, not the bossy supervisor, the trainee, the one people barely learn the name of during boarding, standing in the aisle with her hair pinned perfect, uniform spotless, face calm like she's watching a storm from behind glass. She kneels, picks up a fallen stuffed animal, hands it back to a kid with a soft smile, tightens a seatbelt for an elderly man whose fingers are shaking too badly to do it himself. Normal flight attendant stuff, except her eyes are doing something different. They're not scanning for spilled drinks or open trays. They're measuring the vibration pattern, counting the seconds between jolts, listening to the aircraft like it's speaking a language she already knows. The plane lurches again, sharp enough that a woman screams, and the new girl's expression doesn't crack. It tightens, just slightly, like someone recognizing a problem they've trained for, in a world that most people don't even know exists. Because in the next few minutes, 2 fighter jets are going to pull up beside this airliner, and the pilots are going to hear a call sign over the radio that makes their blood run cold. And that's when everyone on board will realize the new girl isn't just new, she's hidden. Before we get into it, comment where you're watching from, because this story goes from routine flight to nightmare in a heartbeat. Flight 617 wasn't supposed to be memorable. It was the kind of trip people forget the moment they collect their bags, a midweek flight full of business travelers staring at laptops, families counting down minutes, and strangers sharing armrests without ever learning each other's names. Captain Reed had flown this route so many times he could picture every waypoint without looking at a chart. First Officer Kim ran through checklists with the quiet confidence of someone who trusted systems to behave the way they were designed to. In the cabin, Dana, the senior attendant, did what she always did, managed people, managed timing, managed small annoyances before they turned into problems. She'd already clocked the new hire as polite, capable enough, and very quiet. Lena stayed where she was told, smiled when spoken to, listened more than she talked, the kind of trainee supervisors liked because she didn't push back or ask unnecessary questions, just nodded and followed instructions exactly. She poured drinks, helped with carry-ons, answered the same arrival time question 3 different ways without sounding annoyed. Nothing about her stood out, and that was the point. Most of the passengers never looked twice at her. She was background noise, part of the aircraft itself, as ordinary as the seat fabric and safety card tucked into the pocket. If anyone had bothered to really watch her, they might have noticed how she moved through the aisle with unusual balance, how she braced subtly when the plane hit light turbulence before anyone else reacted, how her hands never fumbled even when the cabin jolted. But nobody was watching closely, because nothing was wrong yet. This was still a normal flight, still a routine crossing of open sky, still a situation where the biggest worry should have been spilled coffee or a crying baby. And that's what made what came next so devastating, because when things finally broke, they didn't ease into it. They failed all at once, like a trap snapping shut. Dana had seen every type of new person in the sky, the overconfident one who tries to lead before learning, the nervous one who freezes the first time a passenger gets rude, the chatterbox who treats a safety briefing like open mic night. Lena didn't fit any of them. She was almost too controlled. Not stiff, not robotic, just steady in a way that didn't match her file. 3 weeks in uniform should still show somewhere, in hesitation, in small mistakes, in that rookie habit of checking everyone else's face before making a move. But Lena moved like she already knew the rhythm of an aircraft, when to brace, when to glide past knees in tight rows, when to pause so a cart wouldn't drift. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't trying to impress. She was simply accurate. Dana told herself it was a good sign. Some trainees were just naturally calm. Some people were built for tight spaces and long hours. Still, little moments kept stacking up. A passenger snapped at Lena over a seat swap, and Lena didn't shrink or argue. She answered softly. But the man's tone dropped immediately, like he'd felt something in her voice he didn't want to challenge. A toddler started crying near the back, and Lena didn't do the usual sing-song routine. She crouched, spoke 2 quiet sentences to the mother, and the crying stopped like a switch had been flipped. Even Dana noticed how Lena's eyes worked, not in a creepy way, just observant, like she was constantly mapping the cabin, counting heads, tracking exits, noting who might panic and who might help. Dana chalked it up to good training. Maybe Lena had read the manual twice. Maybe she was one of those people who made prepared look effortless. What Dana didn't know was that Lena wasn't learning a new environment. She was returning to one. The uniform was new, the airline rules were new, the smile and serve routine was new, but the metal tube, the pressurized air, the way a plane talks through vibration and sound, none of that was new to her. And Lena had made a choice before she ever stepped on Flight 617. Keep her head down, follow the chain of command, be the quiet trainee, let the past stay buried. Because if she didn't, people wouldn't see Lena. They'd see the legend she used to be, and she was done living as someone's story. At least, that's what she believed, until the aircraft started shaking hard enough to make the cabin itself feel like it was coming apart. It started with a shiver that didn't belong. Not the soft bump of turbulence, not the gentle ripple you feel when the jet stream gets moody. This was mechanical, deep, like something heavy was grinding itself apart behind the walls. A few passengers glanced up, annoyed more than worried, the way people do when the flight interrupts their movie. Then the right side of the plane jolted, hard. The drink cart trembled, cups clinked, a phone slid off a tray table and slapped the carpet. And that smell hit a second later, hot metal and sharp smoke, the kind that doesn't come from coffee. In the cockpit, Captain Reed and First Officer Kim didn't need anyone to tell them something was wrong. Their instrument panel did it for them. Lights began blinking in clusters that made no sense together, alerts stacked on alerts, each one bad, and the combination worse. Engine 2 had suffered a catastrophic turbine failure, the kind that turns precision blades into shrapnel, and that shrapnel didn't politely stay inside the engine. It punched outward, slicing into critical hydraulic lines and chewing through backup pathways that were supposed to be there for exactly this moment. Hydraulic pressure dropped across multiple circuits. Control messages flashed like the airplane was trying to confess everything at once, and the backup electrical generators started fluctuating, hinting the damage was bigger than the engine itself. Captain Reed's hands moved on instinct, trained, fast, disciplined. He reached for the emergency procedures he'd practiced for years, but the situation was mutating faster than the checklists could keep up, like trying to patch a dam while the water is still ripping new holes. First Officer Kim keyed the mic to high plane center, voice steady in that professional way pilots use to keep fear from getting airtime, declaring an emergency, requesting immediate vectors, nearest suitable airport, any runway that could take them. The controller answered with urgency, clearing traffic, coordinating emergency services, turning the sky into a private corridor for a wounded aircraft that was starting to feel less like a machine and more like a falling animal. Captain Reed tried to stabilize the flight path, but the controls felt wrong. The normal feedback through the yoke went vague, mushy, untrustworthy, like the plane was shrugging off his hands. Then the jet began a slow, uncommanded roll to the right. He corrected, aileron input, measured and firm, and the response came back late and weak, not enough, confirming the thought he didn't want to say out loud. They were losing the ability to fly it the normal way. In the cabin, Dana saw the first flicker of real panic, passengers pressing faces to windows, spotting smoke trailing from the right wing, hearing the vibration grow more violent, feeling the aircraft's strange, uneven movements. She moved to the cockpit door, knocked with urgency, and when First Officer Kim unlocked it, Dana stepped in, pale, voice tight, telling them the passengers could see the damage now, smell it now. Fear was spreading fast. Captain Reed didn't sugarcoat it. He told her to start preparing the cabin for an emergency landing. And even though his words were controlled, his eyes were not. Dana went back out and turned into command mode, securing loose items, directing attendants, guiding passengers, trying to hold the cabin together with nothing but training and tone of voice. And through all of it, Lena moved down the aisle like she'd been built for this, fastening belts, retrieving fallen bags, calming people with a calm that felt almost unfair. To everyone else, she looked like a trainee doing her job, but her eyes kept tracking the plane's behavior, the timing of the shutters, the pattern of the roll, the way the vibration changed when Captain Reed made corrections, like she was quietly reading a language the rest of them couldn't even hear. Because the aircraft wasn't done failing, not even close, and the next 10 minutes were going to turn a bad emergency into something that training manuals don't prepare you for. The next warning didn't blink politely. It slammed into the cockpit like a verdict. Engine 1, the only remaining heart-keeping flight 617 in the sky, started to vibrate in a way every pilot dreads. Not a small fluctuation, not a monitor-it tremor, but the kind that whispers one brutal message: you're next. First Officer Kim adjusted thrust to stabilize it, and the response was wrong. The engine surged, hesitated, then settled into an ugly, unstable rhythm like it was deciding whether to live or tear itself apart. Captain Reed stared at the gauges, the temperatures climbing toward lines that should never be crossed, the vibration trending upward, and he made the kind of choice that feels like losing: reduce thrust, protect the engine from a second catastrophic failure, even if it costs them altitude and control. The moment he pulled it back, the aircraft began to sink faster. Not a gentle descent, a hungry drop. And the controls got worse. The hydraulic pressure kept draining despite every emergency action. The surfaces responded slower and weaker. The jet wasn't flying so much as it was being argued with. High Plains Center kept feeding them headings and hope, vectors toward Pike Valley Airfield, but the numbers weren't cooperating. First Officer Kim ran the descent rate and distance again. Then again, like recalculating might change the truth, her throat tightened as the math stayed cruelly consistent. They were not going to make it. Ahead, the terrain turned from landscape into threat, central ridgelines and rough valleys rising to meet them, the kind of ground that offers no runway, no smooth emergency strip, just rocks, slopes, and impact. In the cabin, the emotional temperature spiked in a way Dana could feel before she could see. Voices rose, people stood up despite orders, eyes darted, hands shook. Someone near the windows shouted that the wing was leaking. Another person screamed at them to sit down. A child started crying and wouldn't stop. Then the phone calls began. Not casual, not "we're delayed," but whispered, broken, urgent calls to spouses and parents. The kind where nobody says the word crash, but everybody means it. Dana moved through the aisle trying to keep it from becoming chaos. Her voice firm, her posture straight. But fear was starting to show at the edges. The plane's movements were getting more erratic. The smoke smell was thicker now, and even the bravest passengers could tell the crew's confidence was being stretched thin. She called Lena forward and sent her to the rear section to help calm people down, a directive meant for someone junior, someone who needed a task, so they wouldn't freeze. Lena nodded once and went, moving through the cabin with that same controlled focus, lowering her voice, making eye contact, giving short, clear instructions that made people listen. Then Captain Reed came back on the intercom, and this time he didn't dress it up. He told everyone they had lost most of their hydraulic systems, that controlling the aircraft was extremely difficult, that they needed to review the safety card and prepare for an emergency landing and evacuation. The word landing hung in the air like a lie they all wanted to believe, because the plane was still dropping and the mountains were still getting closer. The announcement hit the cabin like a match in dry grass. Panic surged again, louder, sharper, people crying openly now, some praying, some yelling questions nobody could answer. Dana found herself juggling too many frightened faces at once, trying to keep order while her own mind screamed the same thing the passengers were thinking: if we don't find somewhere flat, we're going to die. She pushed through toward the cockpit door again, and when she got inside, her voice finally cracked, asking what she should tell them about brace positions and evacuation. Captain Reed looked at First Officer Kim, then back at Dana, and said the words that don't belong on a passenger flight. Prepare them for impact with terrain. Dana went still, her brain refusing to accept what her ears just heard. Because the job is hard enough when you're telling people to brace for a rough landing. It becomes something else entirely when you're trying to prepare nearly 300 souls for the possibility that there will be no landing, only impact. She stepped back into the cabin like someone walking into a storm, and she froze, staring at rows of terrified strangers, knowing she was supposed to tell them the truth, and knowing the truth might break them. That's when Lena returned from the back. Her face was calm, but her eyes were different now, not soft, not hidden, focused like a blade. She walked straight to Dana and placed a steady hand on her shoulder, and the touch didn't feel like comfort from a trainee. It felt like command. Lena leaned in and spoke quietly, gently, but with the kind of certainty that doesn't ask permission. Get them into brace positions, get the exits ready, and do it now. Dana opened her mouth to remind her she was just the new girl, just a trainee, but the words never came, because something in Lena's expression made arguing feel ridiculous. And then Lena turned toward the cockpit, moving with purpose, like someone finally done pretending. The first hint of outside help came through the radio like a lifeline that still didn't guarantee anything. High Plains Center cut in with new information. 2F-22 Raptors were launching from Falcon Ridge Air Base. They would reach Flight 617 within minutes, provide visual assessment, and coordinate anything possible. Captain Reed acknowledged while wrestling the yoke, grateful in theory, unsure in practice, because fighter jets can't magically reattach hydraulic lines or rebuild a blown turbine at altitude. But then they arrived. Two dark shapes slid into view off the right wing, clean, sharp, unreal against the bright sky, moving like they were locked onto rails. The lead pilot's voice came over the frequency, calm and precise. Flight 617. This is Razor 1, requesting permission to move in close for damage check. Captain Reed granted it immediately, his attention split between a radio conversation and an airliner that felt like it was slowly slipping out of his hands. Razor 1 dipped beneath the damaged engine, and even from the cockpit, Captain Reed could hear the slight change in tone when the fighter pilot saw the truth up close. The turbine failure wasn't just ugly, it was catastrophic, shredded metal, collateral damage, the kind of destruction that doesn't stop at one system. Razor 2 slid into position on the opposite side, scanning the wing route, fuselage seams, trailing edges, and she reported what the instruments weren't even fully capturing. Fluid leaking from multiple points, more than one hydraulic pathway compromised. This aircraft was bleeding control. Razor 1 asked Captain Reed directly how much authority he still had, and Captain Reed answered with brutal honesty. Control was degrading fast, response was delayed, roll stability was getting worse, and at their current descent, Pike Valley Airfield was becoming a dream instead of a destination. Inside the cabin, Dana hit the point where leadership starts to feel like cruelty. Passengers were openly crying now. People were clutching each other. Some had stopped asking questions and started saying goodbyes, and the other attendants kept looking to Dana for instructions she didn't want to give. Dana rushed to the cockpit door again, and this time her composure didn't make it with her. Her voice broke as she asked what she should tell them. Brace, evacuate, pray. What do you say when the ground is coming and you don't have a runway? Captain Reed didn't dodge it. Prepare them for terrain impact. Dana stepped back into the aisle like she'd been shoved, staring at nearly 300 faces, realizing she was supposed to translate that sentence into something human, something people could actually hear without collapsing. She couldn't move, not for a moment. Then Lena appeared beside her. Not rushing, not wide-eyed, not asking what to do. She moved with a quiet certainty that made the chaos around her feel less real, like the panic was loud but not in charge anymore. Lena placed one hand on Dana's shoulder, steady, grounding, and spoke in a low voice that carried an edge Dana had not heard from her once during training. Get everyone into brace positions. Have the exits prepped. Secure the cabin right now. Dana's instinct was to correct her. You don't give orders. You take them. You're the trainee. But Lena's eyes stopped that reflex cold. There was no arrogance in them, no performance, just certainty built from a life where hesitation costs people their last breath. Lena moved forward, straight toward the cockpit door, not asking permission from the chain of command anymore. Dana watched her go, stunned, because in that walk there was something familiar, not new higher energy, but the posture of someone who has taken responsibility before, in places where nobody gets a second chance. Lena knocked, firm, not frantic, and when Captain Reed called out, irritated and strained, asking who it was, Lena answered with calm, professional clarity. "It's Lena. I need to come in. I have emergency experience that applies here." Captain Reed didn't want to open that cockpit door, not because he didn't need help, but because the last thing you want in a failing aircraft is a distraction in the one room where seconds matter most. But the yoke felt like it was turning to wet clay in his hands. The plane kept leaning right like it wanted to roll itself into the mountains, and alarms were still stacking faster than they could clear them. First Officer Kim hit the lock, and the door cracked open. Lena stepped in, and the cockpit got smaller instantly, not because of her body, but because of her presence. She didn't look around like a trainee seeing a flight deck for the first time. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask permission to breathe. Her eyes snapped across the panels, hydraulic readouts, control surface indicators, engine temps, vibration, backup power, manual reversion. She read it all the way a medic reads a patient's face, fast, precise, and without panic. Captain Reed started to protest, already forming the sentence, "This is not the time." Lena cut in gently, but with a calm authority that made both pilots pause. "Give me the status in technical terms, not comfort terms." That alone landed like a slap, because it wasn't rude, it was competent, and competence is hard to argue with when you're running out of sky. Captain Reed swallowed and gave it straight. Engine 2 destroyed, hydraulic circuits dropping, controls delayed and weak, engine 1 unstable, descent increasing, destination no longer reachable. Lena nodded once, like she expected every word, then leaned closer to the controls and asked questions no passenger flight trainee should even think to ask. "What's your fuel load now? What's the center of gravity trend? Any partial pressure left in the backup circuit?" First Officer Kim answered automatically, because her brain recognized the pattern. This wasn't curiosity. This was someone building a plan in real time. Lena's gaze locked on the indicators that showed what the airframe could still do, and what it had already lost. Her fingers hovered near the yoke and throttles without touching them yet, like she respected the fact that it was still Captain Reed's aircraft until he said otherwise. Then she asked the question that made Captain Reed blink. "Have you tried controlling roll using differential thrust alone?" Captain Reed gave a tight nod. "We tried. It's not enough. Not like this." Lena didn't argue. She absorbed it, recalculated, then said something that didn't belong in a commercial cockpit at all. "I need direct contact with the Raptors now." Captain Reed stared. "We're already talking to them through center." Lena shook her head slightly. "Not through a relay. I need them on a military emergency frequency, and I need it immediately." First Officer Kim looked at Captain Reed, confused and a little offended on his behalf. Like, who is this flight attendant to demand radio access? Then the aircraft lurched again, harder, and that question answered itself. Pride was a luxury they couldn't afford. Captain Reed gestured sharply at the radio panel. "Do it." Lena keyed the frequency with practiced discipline. No fumbling, no searching, no, like she had done this 1,000 times with her life on the line. Her voice on the radio changed, still calm, but now it carried something heavier, command. "Razor 1, Razor 2, this is Wraith, requesting tactical support under emergency recovery protocols." Silence hit the channel for a few heartbeats. Not static silence, stunned silence. Then Razor 1 came back, and his voice didn't sound like a pilot chatting over a routine intercept anymore. It sounded like someone who just heard a ghost speak. "Say again, confirm call sign." Lena didn't flinch. "Wraith, I repeat, Wraith." And then she added verification details, clipped and exact, the kind you don't invent if you want to stay alive. Captain Reed and First Officer Kim turned to look at her like she had just spoken a different language in their cockpit, because she had. Razor 1 responded again, and the tone had shifted fully now. Respect, urgency, and something close to disbelief. "Wraith, identity confirmed," he said, and when he said it, it didn't sound like he was confirming a person, it sounded like he was confirming a legend. Lena didn't react to the weight of it. She went straight to work. "I need you as external eyes," she said. "Call out control surface movement and actual response. My cockpit indications aren't trustworthy. I need ground clearance updates, and I need you to scan for any flat landing area within range, not a runway, terrain, valley, anything we can survive. Razor 1 answered each instruction instantly. Copy. Razor 2 slid wider, sensors sweeping ahead, already hunting for someplace the size of a miracle. Captain Reed finally found his voice again, sharp and strained. Who are you? Lena looked at him, and for the first time the mask slipped just enough to show the truth underneath. I'm retired Air Force, she said, combat pilot, special recovery work. Captain Reed's jaw tightened. You're telling me now? Lena didn't get defensive. She got honest. If we keep doing standard procedure, we hit terrain in under 10 minutes, she said. That's not drama. That's math. Then she asked the question that was bigger than the cockpit, bigger than rank, bigger than ego. Are you willing to transfer control to me so I can try methods that will feel wrong, look wrong, and maybe the only reason anyone walks away? Captain Reed looked at First Officer Kim, and Kim's expression answered before her mouth did. They were out of options. He looked back at Lena, and you could see the fight in him, the instinct to hold the yoke until the end, the pride of a captain, the fear of handing his aircraft to someone in a cabin uniform. Lena held his gaze without blinking, not challenging him, just refusing to lie. If you refuse, she added, you die doing everything you were taught. Captain Reed exhaled like it hurt, then pulled his hands off the controls. Your aircraft, he said, voice tight, formal, final. Lena slid into the left seat with smooth precision, hands settling on the yoke and throttles like they belonged there. Outside, the two Raptors tightened their formation, ready to become her eyes, her scouts, and the only backup left in the sky. The moment Lena's hands took the controls, the cockpit didn't feel like a workplace anymore. It felt like a battlefield with a stopwatch. She didn't slam the yoke or wrestle it like Captain Reed had been forced to. She made tiny, deliberate inputs, almost insulting in how small they were, like she was negotiating with the aircraft instead of fighting it. Then her right hand went to the throttles. Not both, just the one remaining engine, and she began doing something that looked wrong to airline-trained eyes. Micro-adjustments, a touch more thrust, a touch less, time to the aircraft's roll tendency, using asymmetric forces like makeshift muscles to replace hydraulics that were no longer there. Captain Reed watched the attitude indicator settle slightly, watched the roll rate reduce, not gone, but calmer, like the aircraft had finally stopped trying to throw itself off a cliff every 10 seconds. First Officer Kim blinked hard, recalculating what she was seeing, because this wasn't on any checklist, it was improvisation at the edge of physics. Razor 1, Lena said into the radio, talk to me. What do you see? Razor 1's voice came back instantly, closer now, tighter formation. I've got eyes on your surfaces, minimal movement on the right aileron, rudder responding a fraction. You're holding wings closer to level. Keep doing what you're doing. Lena's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened as if she'd just gotten the one instrument she could trust. Razor 2, find me something flat, she said. I don't need pretty, I need survivable. Razor 2 went quiet for a few seconds, scanning ahead, sensors sweeping the terrain like a predator searching for a weakness. Below them, the world had turned into jagged geometry, ridges, ravines, and slopes rising to meet an aircraft that had no business being there in its condition. Captain Reed's instinct screamed for Pike Valley Airfield, a runway, a tower, crashed trucks, an actual plan. But Lena didn't live in the world of should, she lived in the world of what is, and what is, was they were not going to make it. Razor 2 finally came back. I've got a valley, her voice tense. Elkstone Valley, roughly 40 miles, open stretch, not a runway, rough ground. But it's the best I see that isn't instant death. Lena didn't hesitate. Give me heading, elevation changes, and obstacles. Numbers came through, rapid, clipped, and Lena began the turn. It wasn't a normal bank, because the aircraft couldn't support a normal bank. She built it slowly, like bending steel with patience, using thrust changes and partial rudder to coax the nose around while protecting what little stability they had left. Captain Reed stared at the turn rate and wanted to speak, to warn, to correct, but he couldn't find a single wrong move to point at, because somehow it was working. Razor 1 narrated what the cockpit couldn't trust anymore. Nose is coming left. Wings holding. You've got clearance over the ridge. Keep it shallow. You're good. You're good. First Officer Kim called airspeed with a voice that sounded like it was coming through clenched teeth because the numbers were ugly and the ground was still rising. Lena reached for systems most commercial pilots never touch outside of a simulator: emergency backups, partial flap extension through alternate means, not enough to stress the airframe, just enough to change their lift and sink rate without tearing something else loose. The plane shuddered as the configuration changed, and passengers screamed somewhere behind them, but the descent softened slightly, just enough to keep the valley option alive. Dana's voice crackled over the intercom, desperate, asking if they were about to hit. Lena keyed the cabin mic and spoke once, firm, calm, unmistakably in charge. "We are executing an emergency recovery and landing off airport. Stay in brace position, follow crew commands. Do not move until instructed." It wasn't a promise, it was a directive, and in the cabin it landed like permission to hope. Elkstone Valley filled the forward view now, a rough strip of open terrain framed by slopes. Not welcoming, just less lethal than everything else. Lena started setting up the approach, and this was where it got violent. To control descent without reliable surfaces, she used aggressive sideslip techniques, pushing the aircraft into the airflow at an angle, trading comfort for survivability, bleeding altitude the way you bleed speed on a mountain road, harsh, controlled, and completely unnatural to watch. Razor 1 became a living altimeter. You're high by a little, correct, correct. Now you're on a better path. Ridge on your right. Clear it by a few hundred feet. Don't drift. Razor 2 relayed final position to rescue services, because Lena had warned them she would not have spare seconds for talking in the last minute. And she was right. The valley floor rushed up fast, too fast, the kind of closing speed that makes every nerve in your body scream no. Captain Reed's hands curled into fists in his lap, his whole life trained to intervene, and now his only job was not to. First Officer Kim called, "Altitude, altitude," and then, quieter. "This is going to be hard." Lena exhaled once, like she was letting go of every distraction a human mind can carry: reputation, fear, the past, the fact that nearly 300 people were depending on her. She focused on one thing: getting the wings level at the instant of contact, because if the wings dropped, the aircraft would cartwheel, break apart, and turn Elkstone Valley into a grave. Razor 1's voice tightened. "You're seconds out. Wings nearly level. Hold it. Hold it." The ground hit them like a hammer. The landing gear didn't land. It failed, snapping and collapsing under the force, debris exploding outward as the fuselage slammed onto rough terrain. Metal screamed. The aircraft skidded, bounced, slammed again, and for a horrifying instant it felt like the whole body of the jet wanted to twist sideways and disintegrate. But Lena fought it with the only tools left: differential braking, asymmetric thrust bursts, tiny yoke corrections that barely did anything alone but mattered when combined, keeping the nose from swinging, keeping the wings from dipping, keeping the fuselage aligned just long enough. Fire erupted behind them as separated components ignited, flames licking up into the air like a signal flare from hell. The aircraft tore across the valley floor for what felt like forever, then finally began to slow, grinding to a broken, smoking stop. Not intact, not pretty, not safe, but recognizable, and more importantly, survivable. And the second the motion died, Lena grabbed the microphone and her voice cut through shock like a blade. "Evacuate, evacuate, evacuate, move now." For a few seconds after the aircraft stopped, nobody moved. The cabin was filled with that stunned silence people get when they realize they're still alive, but their brains haven't caught up yet. Then the smoke thickened, and survival kicked the door down. Lena's voice came over the intercom again, sharper now, not comforting, commanding. "Leave everything. Heads down. Move to the exits, now." Dana snapped back into motion like someone pulled her from underwater. She and the other attendants shoved open doors with shaking hands, yanked release handles, and the emergency slides dropped with violent speed, slapping against the ground outside like they were desperate to get people out. Passengers poured into the aisle, not screaming anymore, too shocked for that, moving with wide eyes and stiff bodies, clutching children, half carrying the injured, stepping over debris and broken panels without understanding how close they'd come to never stepping anywhere again. Dana's training finally won the fight over terror, She planted herself at an exit and started doing what she'd practiced 1,000 times. Voice loud, clear, relentless. Jump and slide. Don't stop. Move away from the aircraft. Outside, wind tore at them. The air smelled like dirt and burning fuel, and flames began licking up from behind the wing, crawling forward with the kind of speed that makes you understand fire isn't an element, it's a predator. In the cockpit, Captain Reed and First Officer Kim were still frozen in their seats, faces slack, hands hovering like they were still holding the controls in their minds. Lena turned back to them, reached out, and physically pulled Captain Reed by the shoulder. Move. That single word worked better than therapy. Captain Reed stumbled up, First Officer Kim followed, and Lena shoved them toward the escape route, forcing motion the way you force a stalled engine back to life. Then she did something most people never see, because most people never survive a crash to witness what comes next. Lena stayed behind. Not for drama, not for hero points, for procedure, for people. She pushed against the tilted aisle, moving seat to seat, checking for anyone stunned, pinned, unconscious, or too terrified to stand, her eyes scanning like a searchlight through haze, counting heads in real time. Because the only thing worse than crashing is leaving someone inside the wreckage because everybody assumed they got out. A man near the middle row couldn't move his leg, stuck under a twisted armrest. Lena bent, braced, and tore the metal just enough to free him. Not gracefully, not gently, efficiently. Go, she told him, and the tone didn't allow debate. Smoke rolled overhead, hot and dirty, and the cabin lights flickered like the aircraft was finally dying for real. When Lena reached the back, she saw the last cluster of passengers funneling out, and she followed, jumping onto the slide with one hand still gripping the doorframe, eyes cutting back inside one final time, making sure the cabin was empty. She hit the ground hard, stumbled, then ran, not away from fear, away from timing, because the fire was gaining. Behind her, flames surged into the fuselage, bright and violent, swallowing the rear section like it had been waiting. Lena made it clear and finally dropped to her knees in the dirt, chest heaving, hands trembling for the first time since the first engine failed. Not because she'd lost control, because her body was finally allowed to remember it was human. Dana sprinted toward her and fell beside her, grabbing her shoulders, searching her face like she expected to find blood. "Are you hurt?" Dana asked, voice breaking. Lena shook her head once and looked around the valley, counting, eyes darting over scattered survivors, some standing, some sitting in shock, some crying now that there was room for it. Captain Reed approached, ash on his face, eyes wide like he still couldn't believe the aircraft had done what it just did. First Officer Kim beside him, trembling but upright. They stared at Lena the way you stare at something that rewrites what you thought was possible. Overhead, the two Raptors circled, still guarding the scene like they weren't ready to let go yet. And Razor One came on the radio again, voice thick with emotion he couldn't quite hide. "Wraith, that was the most unreal recovery I've ever seen." Rescue helicopters appeared in the distance, rotors thumping, med teams and emergency crews rushing in as if speed could undo what almost happened. Razor One added, quieter now. "When this is over, ma'am, I'd like to meet you, shake your hand, if you'll allow it." Lena gave a short exhale that might have been a laugh if she had more breath, and keyed the mic once. "After everyone's safe," she said, "you can buy me a drink and pretend you weren't scared." It was the first hint of humor since hell opened under them, and it broke something in Dana, tears finally spilling. Because in that moment, with smoke behind them and survivors scattered across Elkstone Valley, Dana understood the truth. The new girl hadn't just helped them, she had carried them. And now there was only one question left that mattered. Who was she really? Dana didn't ask the question right away, not because she didn't want to, but because the valley was full of noise now. Helicopters chopping the air, med teams shouting, survivors crying, laughing, vomiting from shock, and somewhere behind all of it the aircraft still burning like a reminder that physics almost won. But once the last injured passenger was lifted onto a stretcher and the panic thinned into exhausted disbelief, Dana found Lena sitting on a patch of dirt, knees pulled up, watching people the way a shepherd watches a flock after a storm, counting them without looking obvious, making sure nobody drifted back toward the wreckage. Dana sat beside her, careful, like she was approaching a wild animal that had just saved her life. "You're not Who you said you were, Dana finally whispered. Lena didn't flinch at it. She just stared out at the scattered group of survivors and said, I told you my name. Dana swallowed. That call sign, the way those fighter pilots reacted. Who are you? Lena was quiet for a moment, and for the first time since the emergency began, she looked tired in a human way, not weak, just worn down by the weight of being seen again. I used to fly, she said simple. Dana gave a shaky laugh that wasn't really laughter. That's not used to fly. That's whatever that was. Lena's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Then she finally looked at Dana. I was Air Force, she said. Special recovery work, the kind of flying nobody writes about unless they're trying to scare pilots into studying harder. Dana's eyes filled instantly, not just with emotion, but with something else, embarrassment, the memory of how she'd spoken to Lena that morning like she was a child with a name tag. You were a legend, Dana whispered, like saying it too loud might summon a new emergency. Lena looked away. I was a person with a job. Dana shook her head. Then why? Why were you here, in this uniform, letting people treat you like you didn't know anything? That one hit deeper than the crash, and Lena took a slow breath before answering. Because I wanted quiet, she said. Because I missed airplanes, not war stories. She nodded toward the survivors, families huddled together, strangers holding strangers, kids wrapped in blankets too big for them. Because I wanted to serve people without being a headline, she continued. And because if people know what you used to be, they stop seeing what you are now. Dana wiped her face with her sleeve like she was angry at her own tears. I treated you like a trainee, she said, voice cracking, like you needed direction. Lena finally turned fully toward her, calm and gentle. You treated me like the role I chose to show you. That should have been comforting, but it made Dana cry harder, because it meant Lena had been carrying not just skill, but humility, the kind that doesn't demand recognition even when it deserves a parade. Nearby, Captain Reed was giving a statement to emergency officials, voice still unsteady, pointing toward the burned aircraft as if he couldn't believe it had been real, and First Officer Kim stood beside him, hands wrapped around a blanket, staring at the ground like she was replaying every second in her mind. When Captain Reed finally walked over, he stopped in front of Lena, and for a long moment he didn't speak. Then he said, quietly, I've been flying for 23 years. Lena nodded once. I have never, he continued, voice thick, seen anyone do what you did. Lena didn't accept the compliment the way people usually do. She redirected it the way leaders do. You handed over control, she said. Most captains don't, not even when it's killing them. Captain Reed's eyes dropped, and he admitted the truth nobody likes admitting. I didn't want to. I know, Lena said, but you did it anyway. That's when First Officer Kim stepped forward, and her voice was small but precise. Everyone lived, she said, as if she needed to say it out loud to believe it. The words traveled through the survivors like a wave. Everyone lived. At first it didn't land. Then it landed too hard. People began sobbing, laughing like it hurt, hugging strangers, collapsing to the ground because their legs finally understood they didn't have to keep holding them up. A mother clutched her 2 children and cried into their hair, repeating the same phrase over and over. We're here, we're here, we're here. And Lena, the person who had forced the sky to give them back, just sat there, watching it with an expression that was both distant and soft, like she was letting the scene burn into her memory in a different way than combat ever could. Overhead, the Raptors finally broke their circle and peeled away, but not before Razor One came in on the radio one last time. Wraith, he said, voice steady now, but full of something like reverence. It would be an honor, whenever you're ready. Lena keyed the mic, looked at the survivors, then at Dana, then at the burned wreckage, and said, You did good up there, Razor. A pause then, and yes, you still owe me that drink. Later, after the hospitals and the interviews and the headlines, the truth that mattered most wouldn't be the call sign or the fighters or the impossible landing. It would be the part nobody could turn into a clean hero story. That the person everyone ignored at boarding, the new girl who poured their soda and smiled politely, was also the person who refused to let them die just because the situation didn't fit the manual. Because Lena didn't save them with magic. She saved them with mastery, with brutal clarity, and with the kind of courage that doesn't announce itself until it has to. And when Dana thought about that later, one detail kept coming back, sharper than the crash. Lena didn't step forward to be seen. She stepped forward because it was time. And when the sky demanded someone extraordinary, the quiet new girl finally stopped pretending she was ordinary.